Hey guys, this is Ken from Nippon Bro. How's it going? Right now, I'm just at a baseball field. It kind of looks like one of those like abandoned ones. Not many people play on it, but right now it's super sunny and just kind of stepped in mud there. I don't know if you guys can see that. But yeah, just enjoy my day out here. But what I am going to do today is to actually show you guys how to take portrait photos. So having said that, we're gonna get right into it. But you guys know the drill. Always an intro. Hey guys, so basically what we're just going to do is get into the camera settings of your camera to be able to take great portrait photography. Now portrait photography, I just want to kind of define it a little bit, is you don't really need to necessarily take a subject, because a lot of people when they think portrait photography, they think of taking a subject like a person, a headshot, which is actually not the case for portrait photography. It's just kind of defined that way because when people think of portrait, they obviously just think of headshot. They need to get their LinkedIn photo done. But not necessarily. So portrait just came from the style of actually just shooting vertical. So if you take your camera and you just go from landscape, which is just straight on, and then just twisting it, that is actually vertical and called portrait in photography world. So portrait just derived from there, and then for some reason it just, you know, a lot of people took pictures of other people just because that is very simple to do, and that's where everyone starts. So they just kind of implicated and combined the word portrait and the style of taking portrait with the person, because the person is from top to bottom, and if you take vertical then it's top to bottom. So it is kind of, that's where it kind of derived from. So anyways, just letting you know that portrait photography doesn't necessarily mean that you need to take photos of a person. You can take photos of anything, an object that's isolated that you want to focus on, and pull focus and blur the background. So that is pretty much what a portrait photography is. So having said that, what we're going to do is we're just going to go into your camera settings, and I'm going to show you what you have to do in order to take the focused subject and to blur the background to get that bokeh, so you can get that nice depth of field to focus your subject. So we're going to get straight into it right now. So the first thing we're going to go into is aperture settings. So we're going to take you over to my camera. So adjusting the aperture for this type of particular photography, and we are going to actually keep it no higher than f5.0. The only reason why is because the more higher you go than that, you are not going to create the differentiation between the foreground subject and the background of the subject. And if you want that blurry bokeh, then you're going to want to actually keep that f-stop very low. So currently I have mine set at right here. It says f1.4. And that is the lowest that my lens is capable of going. Now that is pretty good for a lens, for a prime lens. And if you want to bump it up to 5, you just turn your dial, and you're gonna just go all the way up to 5. You're gonna notice the image getting darker. If the image gets darker, then you need to either start using the ISO or the shutter to actually bring up the image again. So now that you got your aperture settings, we're gonna start moving on to the ISO. So for ISO, you wanna actually keep the ISO as low as possible. Remember when I just said that with the f-stop, if you are going to make the f-stop higher in the numbers, then you're going to want to adjust your ISO or shutter. Well, to be honest, you want to always adjust your f-stop, which is your aperture, or your shutter at all times. If you want to keep the ISO very low, as possible, unless you have kind of like the newer Canon camera or the newer upcoming Sony camera, because those are going to be able to shoot, I think, over like of ISO 10,000 and still not have noise in it. So that is the technology evolving. But for any recent cameras that came out and the older cameras, you're going to still want to keep that ISO low, just so you don't have to edit it on post, because it actually starts distorting the other parts of the image that you don't want to distort, just by fixing the grain on your footage. So you want to keep the ISO low, keep everything simple in the camera so you don't have to do too much in post. So that is ISO for you guys. So you got your ISO set, right? Perfect. So we're going to move into shutter speed now. Now with shutter speed, what you're going to want to do is keep that shutter speed over 1/200. I would say anything under that, you can still get away with 1/100, 1/150, but I would literally just stop it at, you know, just a good practice to keep it at 1/200 or over. Just so, this is more for people who take family portraits, who have a group of people and there's kids in it and they don't really sit still, and you know you snap a shot what you think is gorgeous, and then on the little tiny screen that you see, you're like, okay, perfect, we can actually move on with this, and by the time you bring it in post, the baby's hand moved a little bit and it created motion blur. So you don't want that motion blur. You want to keep everything as crispy as possible, so bump those shutter speeds up in order to get that crispy photo. Currently I have 1/200, and if I go up, it'll make the image darker, but you're gonna get more sharpness. But right now I want to actually bring the f-stop down again, and you can see how bright the actual image is. And then that encounters that I can bring up the shutter speed to 1/400 and still get a pretty good exposure. So that is pretty much shutter settings for you guys. So now that we got those three in-camera settings, we're just going to talk about the lenses that you're going to use for portrait photography. The reason why we want to go over this is because this is a gray area that is not necessarily by the book, in a sense, for my style of photography and some other people as well. And you know, in school you learn a lot of things that you kind of go through, what lenses to use for what situation, but when you are out in the real world, you're not really using those lenses. Reason being is because you're trying to find your own style. You can't always go by the book, because in order for you to become a better photographer, become a better videographer, you are going to have to experiment. And experimenting is one of the key things. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. But having said that, we're just going to go over some lenses that I use for my portrait photography. So having said that, we're just going to go into some lenses that I use for my own personal photography for pretty much everything. So we're just going to get right into it. So the first lens I have here is a Sigma 33mm f1.4. And the f1.4 is key because it has a low aperture capability to be able to get the most blurred background as possible for my subject to be differentiated from the background, because I want the subject to be nice and crisp in the photo and then the background to be just blurred. So having said that, this is a great lens. It's a prime lens, it's not a zoom lens, so I have to take it with me on a very specific shoot, but usually I carry it with me because my bag can hold a lot of stuff. So that's kind of like my, I guess, go-to, in a sense that if I want somewhere in between a landscape and portrait, this is what I will have on my camera. Now having said that, moving on to the 56mm, some people just use the 50mm. 6mm difference doesn't make a big difference. Yes, it crops in a little bit, but for me, I just feel like the Sigma brand does give me the best photo quality for what I do. Now that's not necessarily to say that I'm going to start not using the other lenses, even the Canon lenses or Tamron or any of those brands. I would say that they're good, but I just chose Sigma out of all the brands. It's made here in Japan, and I just love the quality and the build of the Contemporary line, and I feel like the Contemporary line, when they built it, they just made everything at f1.4, so you get that nice choice of having blurred backgrounds, and so I think that is something that is actually beneficial to me. And then the other one I have is a zoom lens. So this one actually came with a kit. So this is a kit lens for the a6400 for Sony, and I felt like it's actually a pretty good lens, and this one goes to f-stop of 4.5 and 6.3. So this is very specific. If I want to zoom into something on a nice day, then I would take this with me. I don't really need an ND filter for it because it only goes down to 4.5. So if I kind of go, I would say midday, a little bit cloudy, then I'd be okay to take this lens with me anywhere without an ND filter. So this is one of my go-to lenses. It is a 55 to 210. So it's a zoom lens. That's the only zoom lens I have in my bag right now. The other lens I have is an actual 16mm Sigma lens, which I always have on my camera just because it's kind of like my go-to. I do portraits with this lens as well, and to be able to take portraits and to do landscape whenever I want, it's pretty versatile. I rather actually move closer to my target than I do zoom. That's just me. But if I do maybe get a zoom lens, I might get a Canon lens and just get an adapter for my Sony, just because I do love Sony so much for their autofocusing capabilities. So that is kind of like my little buddy that I'll always have on my camera. But moving on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out and start shooting some photos of portrait photography, and then we're just going to get right into it, guys. So I'll be right back. Hey guys, so basically what I did was I just switched up my 16mm Sigma to a 56mm Sigma. So I'm just going to take a picture of this right here. I think this is kind of like a pitcher's net for baseball, when they throw the pitch and they don't really get hit by the ball on the repercussion of the batter hitting it. So I'm going to take a picture of that and we'll see how that goes. So I'll be right back. So pretty much, guys, that is it for that part. Another thing I saw was this kind of like stage thing that they have back here. So I might actually take a few shots of this. But here's another thing about portrait photography. Because you are using some different lenses that you want to experiment with, and currently I'm using a 56mm, and that punches in pretty close to something. Which makes you have to kind of walk back a little further if you want to take the whole entirety of the thing. But I feel like that kind of misses the purpose of taking portrait photography. My mission is not to take the entirety of this stage, for example. My vision is actually to punch in on the texture. So if you kind of go on my Instagram, you'll kind of see some texture shots, some close-up of different materials that you'll see, whether it's grass or the ground, gravel, cement, metal, rust, anything that you can think of that I kind of punch in a little close to take a portrait of. And that's just kind of my style. I mean, I don't really take too much human photography where I take pictures of people, but you know, anything that will do in order to kind of satisfy your style is, I think, good enough. And you know, if you can actually bring a certain style for you by doing that, then that's awesome. And then bring it into Lightroom and start editing and start playing around with the tone curves and the exposures, the highlights, the midtones, the shadows, everything. Just do it. Because as long as you don't do it, you're not going to know how to do it. And if you want an actual video more thoroughly in depth with Lightroom and how I kind of go about doing the edits for my photos, comment down below. And make sure you guys subscribe and hit that like button and a little ring, just a little ring on the notifications, so at least you guys get notified. You guys can see different types of tutorials, and hopefully you guys can get something out of this. And I know I've been kind of promising you guys a little bit of an update on Nippon Bro, the company itself, and doing the registration. So I'm going to do a real brief video on how to do that. And that's going to be on my playlist for Nippon Bro, the company. So you can find that there. And I'm not sure when I will be able to post that, but hopefully soon. And you guys will see an update on my page. But otherwise, I will see you guys next week. And until next time, guys, peace out.